is what is military leadership lessons, followed by the subject today, and then we'll meet Admiral Arun Prakash and get to know his incredibly awe-inspiring experience and background. And then we'll hand it over to Admiral Arun Prakash for his opening remarks. And after that, we'll dive straight into segment one of our discussion, which is leadership at the bottom of the pyramid. That sounds a little intriguing, and I'll explain why we chosen that phrase at the bottom of the pyramid. After which, we'll get into segment two, which is actually the territory of leadership. And then we'll understand the 3D leadership insights that the respected Admiral has to offer. You'll get to know all about what we mean by three-dimensional. And then we'll have a question and answer session. If you have questions, partners in learning, feel free to post them in the chat box and then we'll take them up. And then we'll have closing remarks by Admiral Arun Prakash, but in between 8 and 9, we'll have the poll. And then we'll get into a summary and thanks by me. So without much further ado, let's understand what is military leadership lesson series all about. Leadership is the difference between winning and losing a war, and many of the concepts and practices deployed by military leaders are directly applicable in other spheres of human activity, notably business and enterprises. Indeed, much of management knowledge has evolved from military applications. Military leaders have priceless lessons to offer to their civilian counterparts, and so this series constructs a bridge of learning from battlefields to enterprises. Military leaders are fantastic teachers because they come from tried, tested, and proven experience in the heat and dust of war, uncertainty, and challenges, all of which can come in extremely handy for all of us who are working in business and enterprise. So in this series, 3-star officers and indeed 4-star officers like Admiral Arun Prakash and other exceptional personnel of the Indian Armed Forces share their experience, expertise, and wisdom on the art, science, and practice of leadership in a series of in-depth explorations with me, V.K. Madhav Mohan. Today, we are going to explore the intricacies of leadership at the bottom of the hierarchy. So, is there a difference between tactics and strategy? How does a leader create a balance between informality and discipline? These are some of the important questions that we will reflect on today with Admiral Arun Prakash. So we are going to explore all the nuances of leadership and strategy with Admiral Arun Prakash, PVSM, AVSM, VRC, VSM retired, former Chief of Staff of the Indian Navy. We must meet one of India's greatest military leaders and war heroes, Admiral Arun Prakash. I know he's a little embarrassed at the introductions, but allow me, Admiral, I seek your indulgence because our country needs to know the contributions and stature that you have attained. And the great, shall I say, efforts that you have put in so that all of us can lead our lives in comfort and security. I would like all of our partners in learning to pay particular attention to these 3 letters, VRC. which stands for Veer Chakra, which is for gallantry in the face of the enemy. And we'll talk more about moral courage and physical courage, which is one of Admiral's favorite subjects I know. Admiral Arun Prakash, Param Vishish Seva Medal, Ati Vishish Seva Medal, Veer Chakra, and Vishish Seva Medal, retired, former Chief of Naval Staff, Indian Navy. Admiral Arun Prakash served as India's 18th Naval Chief and Chairman, Chiefs of Staff Committee, retiring in end 2006. A naval aviator by specialization, he commanded a carrier-borne fighter squadron, a naval air station, and 4 warships, including the aircraft carrier INS Virat. He has logged over 2,500 hours on fighters, patrol aircraft, and helicopters. In flag rank, he commanded the Eastern Fleet, the National Defense Academy, and the Western Naval Command. In 2001, he was designated the first CNC of the Andaman and Nicobar Joint Command in Port Blair. In staff appointments, he headed the Navy's aviation and personnel branches and served as Vice Chief of Naval Staff. During his tenure as Chief, many initiatives were launched in the fields of doctrine, strategy, foreign maritime cooperation, and indigenization. He is a graduate of the Indian Air Force Test Pilot School, the Defense Services Staff College, and the U.S. Naval War College. During the 1971 war, he was awarded the Veer Chakra, as I said earlier, for gallantry while flying with the Indian Air Force Fighter Bomber Squadron. Post-retirement, he served 2 terms as a member of the National Security Advisory Board and was chairman of the National Maritime Foundation. Currently, he occupies a distinguished chair in the Naval War College, Goa. He writes and speaks on strategic and defense-related topics and has published a compendium of speeches and writings titled From the Crow's Nest, which I am now holding in my hand. That is a must-read for anybody who is interested in the finer aspects of leadership. Admiral Arun Prakash is not just a naval officer, not just a naval chief. He is very unique in 2 respects. First, he's a deep thinker, and all his thinking displays a clarity of thought that is very rarely seen in the highest echelons of leadership in our country. So he's a deep thinker who has absolute clarity of thought. The second aspect in which Admiral Arun Prakash is so very unique is that he has throughout his career operated at the intersection between the air and the sea. As a fighter pilot, operating from a carrier, and then commanding warships. For partners in learning, participants who are with us today, let me briefly explain why this is so unique. Admiral Arun Prakash was the first Indian pilot to land the Hawker Harrier C aircraft on an aircraft carrier. That's no small distinction because a carrier pilot is not just the best of the best, he's the elitist of the elite. Because basically you're operating from a runway which is heaving and rolling and pitching because it's the vagaries of the sea that the runway is on. And there are dangerous crosswinds all over, which is why landing on an aircraft carrier is considered to be a controlled crash. So operating on an aircraft carrier is just about the most impossible task which needs the highest levels of skill and courage. So these are the reasons why Admiral Arun Prakash is so very unique, and we are so privileged to have you with us, Admiral. We are so honored. And over to you for your opening remarks.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, Madhav, thank you very much for your very flattering introduction. I hope you haven't raised the expectations of your participants overly, but let's hope that they'll find this evening's session beneficial. So I'm delighted to have been invited to participate in this edition of the Military Leadership Series, which you have very thoughtfully instituted. And what gives me added pleasure to be here this afternoon is that you yourself, our host, my host this evening, are a many splendid personality with accomplishments in a vast number of fields, including management, banking, um, information technology, sports, spirituality, and so on. Um, of course, you spend all the time showering praise on my undeserving head, so let me reciprocate a little. So I'm privileged to be here this afternoon with you, especially. You are also an author, and I had the privilege of reading your book, Lonely at the Top. I also recommend it to all our young participants here. And of course, let me mention that Mr. Madhav is also a mentor to captains of business and industry who follow him with great attention. So I look forward to an interesting and fruitful discussion this afternoon. The topic chosen by Mother Mohan could not have been more relevant to the juncture at which our nation stands today. As we all know, we face a crisis of unprecedented proportions, which has caught us off guard and ill prepared. Whatever the reasons, this second wave of COVID is going to cost us heavily, not only in terms of precious human lives, which we see are being lost every minute of the day. There is economic disruption, social upheaval, and there is also going to be a cost in terms of national morale and confidence. So India is going to need both leadership and a well-conceived strategy to recover from this deep crisis and to rebuild our society, our economy, and our self-confidence. So I think Madhav has chosen a very appropriate pair of topics for this afternoon. Now, as was mentioned, the Indian Armed Forces are charged with the responsibility of safeguarding the nation's territorial integrity and sovereignty and defending the state against all threats, both internal and external. But apart from contributing to defense, security, and so on, the armed forces provide a distinctive strand in the multicolored fabric of our nation. They set unique standards of integrity, of professionalism, and excellence for our countrymen. They are not just the embodiment of order and discipline, which we all know. They are staunch upholders of our democratic traditions and contribute to national integration and stability of our country. Now, there was a time when the military were considered, or we considered ourselves as exemplars in terms of ethics, probity, integrity, and the maintenance of highest of standards in every sphere, and especially professionalism. But today, as we look around, there are many other fields in the civilian sphere, and to mention a few, the space Department of Space, the information technology, the hospitality industry, civil aviation are some of them, and where India has achieved the highest standards comparable with the best in the world. And today, the armed forces can learn from these fields. So it's not that we are the best in everything. There are other fields which have also come very close. But having said that, the military still remains a crucial entity for the state and a significant profession to follow because its ultimate aim is to fight wars and to safeguard the nation. Losing a war can have catastrophic and existential consequences for the nation. And therefore, it is totally unthinkable. Go back to 1945, Germany lost the war, Japan lost the war. What happened to those countries? Think of 1971, Pakistan lost the war. It was split into two. So losing a war is unthinkable. Therefore, the military's exclusive focus is always on winning, winning, winning. It's hammered into our heads. From our earliest days, we hear phrases like, we fight to win, there are no runners up in war, and the more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war, and so on. So, how do we manage our affairs? Leadership and strategy are the two key on which success of military operations and certainly a war depends. Not too long ago, people used to debate whether leaders were born or made. And this discussion arose from the fact that in the 17th, 18th centuries, both in Europe and India, there was a belief that only people of royalty or those of blue blood or nobility were fit enough to command soldiers in war. But I think the French Revolution put an end to this kind of thinking, because there was an upheaval in France. The nobility was more or less wiped out, and people from all walks of life took up leadership positions. And no less than Napoleon himself, who was not of blue blood or royalty, he said, I picked up the crown of France, which was lying in a gutter, by the tip of my sword, which meant that it was by his personal ability. So today we believe firmly that leaders are made. Some may be, of course, born with some fortunate traits, but we make leaders in our academies, in our institutions of higher learning, and of course on the battlefield in operations. Every person today who wears a uniform is a leader in some form or the other, or at some level or the other, and he has been shaped by a process and by an organization, which is the armed forces, and we can talk about this. Similarly, we know that going to war without strategy can be a total disaster. As we've seen from our own bitter experience, even the maintenance of peace requires a distinct and clear-cut strategy. You can't have peace unless you have a strategy, as we are finding out. Therefore, in our military academies and our colleges and institutions of learning, we lay a great deal of stress on issues like doctrine, uh, tactics, operational art, and strategy. And these are issues that hopefully we'll touch upon. So, as as Madhav Mohan has told us just now, there are some practices, procedures, and beliefs, etc., which we use in the armed forces, which he thinks would be useful in the corporate or business world, and can be read across. I sincerely hope so. And I think in the next few minutes or hour or so, we can talk about them. So that's all I had to say by way of introduction. Madhav, over to you now.
Thank you, Admiral. Uh, I found your comment about leadership being shaped by a process particularly interesting. Leaders not really born, maybe some leaders are born, but people are shaped into leadership by a process. And those are the kinds of inputs that many of our corporate friends would like to relate to, because I believe that in the corporate environment, the ultimate advantage from a competitive point of view is leadership. You can have all kinds of technology and investment products, services, etc. But if you don't have leadership, you're bound to fail. And with that, let's explore this whole concept of leadership at the bottom of the pyramid. Why did I choose this phrase, the bottom of the pyramid? This comes from Professor C.K. Prahlad's seminal work, Profit at the Bottom of the Pyramid. But what Professor Prahlad referred to as the bottom of the pyramid was people at the lowest level of income who still have needs and wants and who have purchasing power and who can then be a source of income, revenue, and profit for anybody who services those needs in a very cost effective way. But here, I've adapted this bottom of the pyramid to actually reflect the lowest rung of leadership in an organization. That is the very front lines. Officers who are just commissioned, getting into the services, perhaps even fresh MBAs who have just joined their first job, who are at the bottom level of the pyramid of the hierarchy. What does leadership look like at that level? And I would request Admiral to share your thoughts on all these issues that you now see on the screen, which are very relevant right at the bottom. And perhaps at the very lowest rung of leadership in an organization, tactics are perhaps more important than strategy. Is there a difference? Over to you, Admiral.
Okay, so rather than tackling tactics, let me tackle strategy first, because in the military we have a clear-cut hierarchy. By looking at a person, you can make out what is his rank because he wears it on his shoulder. So there's no need to speculate. So if a officer is of a rank of, say, a captain or a major, then you know that he's involved I mean, his main preoccupation would be at the tactical level. There is no sort of question about that. And if he's say a general or a brigadier, then you know that he's a strategic leader. That's how we classify them, because conduct of war is also classified into 3 or 4 levels. There's a strategic level, there is the operational art, then there is a tactical level, and above all these, there is a grand strategic level. The grand strategy is level is looked after by prime ministers and presidents and heads of state. It's at international level. Below that comes the military strategic, which is looked after by generals and so on, and then you have the other levels. So strategy in the military means a broad picture, a long-term vision, a goal. These are the components of strategy, that you have to move from where you are now today to somewhere else or some other objective. And there's normally a threat also involved in it. So strategy involves broad vision, long-term process. Now, in between, there is something, I mean, then you go down to the tactical level, where it is small steps, immediate goals, contact with the enemy, contact with your own men. Strategic leader may be sitting in a air-conditioned office back in the headquarters. In your parlance, it's probably the boardroom, the director's room or the CEO's office. He doesn't see the shop floor. But at the tactical level, maybe a junior manager, an executive, a shop floor engineer, those are the people who meet the men day to day. Their goals and targets are tomorrow. How many items are we going to turn out of this line or whatever? So that is the difference that I see. That strategy, broad vision, long term view, plenty of resources to be employed or deployed, manpower, human resources, financial resources, tactics, immediate goals, short steps. Vision is not maybe tomorrow, day after, etc. So that's the dividing line that we see in the military. Now, how it translates into the corporate or business world, I leave to you.
In fact, that's very similar, Admiral. At the bottom of the pyramid in organizations, business enterprises, say for example, a sales team is at a tactical level. They have X number of products at predefined prices with predefined margins, and they have to meet daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual targets, and they do it as a team. And so there's a whole lot of hard work running daily, number of sales calls per day, the billing per customer, and so on and so forth. So it's very similar.
Yeah, but I presume that there is no harm if a person at the bottom of the pyramid, as you say, is familiarized with what is the strategy, the company, what is the company's long-term aim, and where do you fit in, and that helps. Otherwise, the picture he remains in a tunnel vision situation.
In fact,
So
that is
even
so critical because
yeah,
I think even at the very bottom level, the leader needs to know why he is doing something.
quite
And
right.
that's the strategic element which I think his seniors have to explain to him and align him with.
And in Western armed forces, there's a relatively new concept which is called mission command, which says that the leader, it emerged from how the Germans fought World War II. You heard of Blitzkrieg and so on. The Allies, everybody used to wonder, how did the Blitzkrieg work out so well? They found out after the war that the Germans were not as rigid as we thought they were. They were far more flexible in their thinking than the Allied powers. They would the commander would share his plan down to the non-commissioned officer, to the sergeant, and say, "This is my plan. This is what I want you to get done. But you're not going to do it. Your captain or major or whatever will do it." But in wartime, what happens is very often the captain is shot and killed, the major is gone or whatever it is, injured, and it falls on the sergeant to execute the plan. Now, sergeant could very well say that this is above my pay grade, not my job. I'm going to surrender or whatever. But in the German army, it was expected that even at the lowest level, the plan is known to you. Now you go ahead and carry it. This concept is called mission command. Now the Americans and the British and so on have also adopted it today. And they have something called the strategic corporal. The corporal is the lowest rank in the soldiery. And they say that even if you go out on a patrol commanded by a captain and the captain is killed, and everybody else is, in comparison, there's only a corporal left. But if he knows what the plan is, then he should go and execute the plan.
Yeah,
So it
that's
helps to share the vision with your down the
absolutely. I
pyramid.
mean, that is so critical because in the heat of the moment, anything can happen. You may lose people, you may have injuries, or somebody may leave. And when that happens, if the why has not been explained and inculcated into everybody, then they are bereft of objectives, and that commitment and ownership to the objectives falls apart, and the organization doesn't achieve its targets. So there's
Absolutely.
one great lesson
Also,
here.
initiative at every level. There has to be initiative. If
That's right.
somebody's forgotten or overlooked something, then you take the initiative and again.
And so I think probably the level of initiative right down there in the front lines, on the front lines, is also proportionate to the clarity of the why. Why are they doing what they're doing, and if the strategy has been explained very carefully to the front line also, then the ownership and initiative also is extremely high. As you said, that was one of the main reasons why the blitzkrieg succeeded.
And you see the change in the nature of warfare with change in time. The charge of the Light Brigade in Balkalava, the famous Tennyson's poem, there was not to reason why, there was but to do and die. I mean, those soldiers were given a wrong order. Nobody questioned where the hell we are going. They charged into the cannon shot and shattered. Today we talk about mission command, where you explain to the lowermost non-commissioned officer where you are going, what you are going for, so that there's no gap. So I think these are applicable to the civilian world also. There is always, it helps to take your junior management into confidence, brief them, motivate them.
But would you say, as a general principle, I'm not saying whether it's watertight or not, but as a general principle, would you say that leadership at the bottom of the pyramid tends to be more tactical, even though they may know the strategy, they may understand the why. In the execution, they are actually executors. They're doing the execution. So is that more generally tactical than strategy?
Yes, indeed. No, so for a young officer or a junior manager to be good at his job, he must know the tactics. I mean, he shouldn't spend sleepless nights worrying about marketing strategies and all that. He should do what is his remit to do. So you're absolutely right. At the junior level, at the bottom of the pyramid, leadership is more tactical, and he needs to be good at that kind of leadership. And others leave the rest of it to others whose job it is. So we in the military we train people like that. I mean, the first few years you're taught basic tactics, infantry tactics, small arms, etc. Where you are in contact with the enemy, etc. So the point is well taken that at the junior leadership level is more tactical than strategic.
But
As you come to the front lines.
as you were talking, an interesting example of a mission came to mind. I had not thought about it earlier, but it suddenly clicked into my mind. A few years ago, we had the INS Sumitra, I think, which was deployed to Aden to rescue a lot of Indian citizens there, and people who were stuck there. Now that to the squadron or to the captain of INS Sumitra, uh, there was a very clear mission: go and pick up people and bring them back safely to India. That was the mission objective. But behind that, was there a strategic element?
Yes, indeed. I mean, that mission, the captain's job, of course, was to pick up Indians and bring them back. That's the tactic. But the origin of the mission must have come from the MEA, Ministry of External Affairs, possibly
Right.
even as high as the Prime Minister's office, who would have said that, look, this is a gesture that we want to make, that India is a power that is cooperative with others neighborhood, etc. So send this ship. So at that level, it would have had a strategic fallout also. When we pick up refugees from Sri Lanka, Nepal, etc., those countries are grateful and they express their sentiment. For the captain of the ship, it is a tactical mission. For his second in command, it's even more tactical. He's worrying about where to produce blankets and bed sheets and pillows and how to feed those refugees. So, depending on your level,
Yeah, that's right. Probably the strategic part was to demonstrate India's
capability,
abilities
absolutely.
and its importance in the international relations kind of
Absolutely.
environment. Perhaps even to move us two steps closer to a permanent seat in the UN Security Council,
Yeah,
maybe.
sure. All these little pieces help. Let me
Yeah.
give you one of my own. In 1987, I was commanding a frigate and I was sailing from Vizag to Bombay. And on the way, I was sort of given orders that you should take your ship should proceed to Colombo. Those are the days of the Sri Lankan, you know, LTT sort of civil war going on. So I met with another frigate, and both of us picked up a detachment of commandos, military army commandos, and we went to Colombo. Our orders were to watch the presidential palace, and in case there is trouble for the president, Premadasa, pick him up by helicopter, bring him on your ship, and bring him back to India. Now, this mission could not have been decided at anything below Rajiv Gandhi's prime minister's level, because prime minister himself was going to be there that day. And the issue was that he was going to sign this Indo-Sri Lanka accord, and there were apprehension that there might be trouble. There may be a coup in Sri Lanka, in which case the president is, sort of overthrown. And where does he go? So the Indian Navy ship is there to pick him up and bring him back. So that was a mission, totally strategic. But for me, it was sailing my ship, and while we were there, a sailor fell sick. He had to be evacuated. Now, in the middle of this strategic mission, I can't send a wireless message home. Sailor has fallen sick. So while doing a strategic mission, you have to take care of these little things. So it's very similar to the example you mentioned.
That's
That
right.
sometimes
That's a,
issues get mixed up.
that's right. That's right. And it's fascinating you mentioned President Premadasa, who subsequently, I think in 89 or 90, was a victim of a suicide bomb attack
That's right.
uh, by somebody who had been supplying groceries to his family for many years and who had earned his confidence.
I see.
Uh,
Didn't know that.
there was a grocer right outside his house, and he was Tamil, and he had been supplying groceries for many, many years. And when Premadasa was out on a
Walk.
procession, this person also joined him and detonated. So, and
So
how
as you
that
say, a
altered
mission
the.
can both be strategic and tactical, depending
Correct,
on who you are.
correct,
And
correct. Any other personal stories you'd like to share, Admiral?
no, I think we can we can carry on with stories, but we
Maybe we can go on to the next segment where we can talk a little more about all these things. And here, let's explore the territory of leadership, segment two. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Admiral is a very unique leader. He's commanded flying units, he's commanded sailing units, and then, of course, he's commanded the entire force, which we'll talk about in a bit. Um, would you like to throw some light on the
I would,
nuances?
first of all, but let me first of all say that I'm not unique. There are many people like me. The present chief happens to be a helicopter pilot. He is right now. So I'm in no way unique. I think my friend Madhav is being a little hyperbolic. Yeah, yes, in our younger days when I was a lieutenant, I used to walk around with my chest out and say I'm a naval aviator and so on. But as years go by, you realize that there are many more accomplishments which are more unique and valuable. Okay, but coming to these issues which you put up on the screen, there is a difference in commanding a flying unit and commanding a sailing ship or submarine. Let me take the case of a ship or submarine first. The crew of a ship may be 200, 250, submarine is much smaller, 50, 60 people. You all sail together and you sink together, as the phrase goes. But the fact is that everybody on a ship has a certain job to do, from the captain, whose job is to safety of the ship and fighting the ship as a unit, to the person who runs the engines, who runs the electronics. There is somebody who's cooking the food, somebody who's counting the store, the rice, the atta, etc. Somebody looking after the hygiene of the ship. So everybody, every sailor on the ship, every officer on the ship has an assigned task, and it's a vital task because if he's not there, you will feel his absence, and it will affect the fighting efficiency of the ship. When a ship goes into action, we call it action station. Every every officer and man has a assigned place that when the bugle sound for action station, we sound a bugle. Then you at that point of time you go to so and so place, and this is your action. A little card is given to him on which it is written what he's required to do. If he's a say a sailor who normally does office work, then in action stations his job may be to pick up ammunition shell, pick up missiles or depth charges and provide them to the gun. And if he's not there, then ship's fighting efficiency is affected. So every man has an assigned task, whether it's in peace or in war. Without him, the ship is not as good as it would be. Uh, and the fact is that if you go into war, if a if your ship is hit by a bomb or a torpedo, the ship is in danger. Every man has to look for the safety of the ship, fight flooding or fire or whatever it is. Because when the ship goes down, then all 200 and 200 or 250 people will go down. Nobody will survive. So that phrase sink or swim together is the right phrase. And therefore, this creates a sense of togetherness, a bond of fraternity, camaraderie on a ship. You don't have to say very, if you say from INS, I am from INS Vindhyagiri or whatever, then there is instant bonding. He's from my ship, he's my brother. Even from a sister ship, if Vindhyagiri and Taragiri are sister ships, and you say, I'm from Taragiri and I'm in trouble, I need a lift or whatever. So that bonding is there. So that's a ship, and on a submarine, it is many times more. Submarine is smaller, life is much more difficult, the dangers are there all the time. So the bonding camaraderie is that much stronger. And that makes the job of commanding such units easier. There's already a bond, already a esprit de corps. In a flying unit is different. In a flying unit, if there are 200 people, officers and sailors, only 15 to 20 are the flyers, the pilots, the navigators, the flight engineers, etc. The 85% are the ground staff, the support staff, the maintainers, the mechanics, the logistics people, the accounts people. So whether in war or in peace, it is the flyers who will go out and fly for 1 hour, 2 hours and come back. In war, they are the ones who will face danger, get shot down or get killed and come back. The people who are behind, they stay behind. So there is a distinction. So you have to, as a commanding officer or as a leader in a flying unit, you have to make sure that you make the others feel that they are contributing. Because if the maintainer or the mechanic was not there, my aircraft would not be ready to take. So I will not be able to fly. So I fly only because my mechanics are working. My logistic people are providing the spare part. The account chap is doing his account. So the job of a commanding officer in a flying unit is to create this bond between the combatants and those who are not real combatants, and explain to them that everybody's contribution is the same, whether you fly in the cockpit or you maintain aircraft. So that is the distinction. And perhaps I would say that the demands in a flying unit are a little more. And on a ship, as I said, it's already spirit is there, bonding is there, camaraderie is
Fascinating,
there.
fascinating.
Challenges of leadership are different in the two.
And probably the role of communication and transparency becomes even more critical.
Yes, indeed. So the Air Force found this. Now the other problem is that pay scales, the perks are different. The pilots who fly, they get more pay, they get allowances, they get a different diet, etc. Because they leave. So that difference is also felt by people. People say we work hard, we don't sleep for days to maintain your aircraft, and one little screw or something which is left loose in an aircraft can cost a life. So it's a fact that the contribution is no less. So what the Indian Air Force has done in the last, I think, 10, 15 years was to, instead of saying you're a pilot or a navigator or you're a ground duties person, they said all of us are air warriors. So every Air Force person is called an air warrior, whether he's ground duties, air traffic control, airmen, officers, pilots, etc., which I thought was a clever thing to do. So everybody says proudly with his chest out, I'm an air warrior. Whatever his job is different, his contribution.
I think that's a
So
brilliant formulation.
it is,
The
it
min
is,
minute you say air warriors, I mean, everybody
yeah,
is together. Each person's contribution is equally important. We may do different roles, but our contributions are equally important,
and not to be ignored. Yes.
not to be ignored. Yes, yes. Um, how about approach to results? Because results are what matter in the end. Did you achieve it or not? It's very binary. Uh, so how do you approach results in the forces as a
Well,
commandant?
in the forces, I mean, results are non-negotiable. Either you get attain your results, or you better have a jolly good reason for not doing so. So, and targets are set out very clearly for you. Everywhere they're quantified. For example, on a ship, you are told that you must attain proficiency. You not you, but your men must attain proficiency, say in gun firing, in missile, in anti-submarine warfare, in other in machinery, in damage control, etc. And there are laid down exercises which you must complete. And once you complete it, then you fill up a certain pro forma. Then there is a inspection. The boss comes on your ship with his team of officers of his staff, and he will give you random exercises. Okay, do this. There's a target. Shoot it. Here's a submarine. Find it. Or man has fallen overboard. Pick him up. Or go to a tanker and take oil. So he's sitting there, your boss, a 2-star or 3-star admiral, on your bridge, and he's watching you do all this. So if you've not been conscientious in your during your sailings and your workups and so on, it will show up immediately. So that is how we maintain fighting proficiency. And I'm sure it is so in the other two services. In an air squadron, it is the same. Your pilots better have proficiency in gunnery, in rocket firing, missile firing. And it is up to the commanding officer to set the task, to guide them. If a pilot is not keeping up, then you say, all right, you send him up in a two-seat trainer aircraft with an instructor and him. He sits in the aircraft and he's shown this is the right way of doing things. So there is enough time given to you to attain the standard. And then comes the day of reckoning where your unit is inspected, whether it's a ship, submarine, or air squadron. You're inspected. You don't come up to, your ship doesn't come up to the standards. I'm afraid then the commanding officer gets a sack. It's quite straightforward. And
Accountability is clear,
accountability is quite clear. And then if you don't get promoted later on to the next rank, many of us wonder what the hell went wrong. I was a good boy, I did everything. If you look back, you trace it back, then this will be the one of the causes of your not making progress. So, the aim is made, objectives made clear to you. This is what is required of you. You are given a chance to, opportunities. You are inspected, and then the consequences are also pretty harsh and fairly early.
so from what you're saying, it's quite clear to me that one of the most important responsibilities of that leader there is to train his people. So training becomes center stage. They have to practice and train and rehearse and practice and train so that the required standards are always achieved.
Absolutely. Not one of the important, it is the most important thing because it's a
Right,
cycle.
right.
Because people will keep changing on a ship or a unit, or new sailors will come, new officers will come. So there is no time at which you can say all 100% of my men and officers are fully trained and ready for war. Because the next day you will get an order saying 10 chaps are going here, going for a course, going for some training, etc. So it's a continuous, and the Navy regulations say quite clearly the captain is responsible for training on the ship. There's no doubt about it. Because
So
your
in other
efficiency.
words, very interesting. This is a very interesting concept because a lot of the time we think in business and management that training is a staff kind of activity, whereas here in the forces, training is an operational responsibility.
Absolutely, because the results, the consequences are to be borne by the boss. And in this process, mentoring has a very important piece. Because many of us in the armed forces feel that, I've told this chap and he's not doing it, so let's kick him or whatever, or give him a bad report. So many young officers often come to you and say that, I did everything I was told, but when time comes for promotion, I haven't made it. So there's something called mentoring, which you know all about. You do it so often. It is also required of an officer that all those who are junior to you or who are working under your supervision, you must call them every now and then at the every opportunity and tell them either that you are doing very well, keep it up, go on, son, or you are doing all right, but these are your flaws, son, mend them, fix them. It is your duty. And so that if after 3 months or 6 months he has not listened to you or he's listened to you and ignored your advice and mentoring, that's the time you come down on him like a ton of bricks and possibly write something harsh. And I think that possibly managers should also be doing the same thing if they're good managers,
So
mentoring their.
the other side of it is, as a commander or as a leader, it's the commander's or leader's kind of job to make himself accessible and give his subordinates the feeling that they can go to him with a problem, that they can talk to him and get advice, rather than be unapproachable and pull rank all the time.
Well, that's the ideal. At least in the Navy, we had a tradition of I hope we still have the tradition that senior officers have always been open to junior officers. They can socially and otherwise they can come up and talk to us. I will not speak for other services where their hierarchy is a little more rigid and perhaps it is not customary for juniors to express. But I think for the health of the organization, all of us need to change, become more transparent, become more open, accessible. Otherwise, as a senior officer, if you live in a little box, then you're fooling yourself. You will harm yourself eventually because you won't come to know the actual state of affairs on your unit, your ship, or your command, unless somebody has the guts to tell you. So that's an
Right,
important thing. Telling,
right.
speaking truth to power is what you hear these days. Not a
That's right.
very.
That's right. In management, we say, particularly in change management, if you involve the people who are going to be affected by a change in the design of that change, then the ownership of that change and acceptance of that change is going to be guaranteed. Whereas if you thrust something down somebody's throat, um, Newton's third law operates. The cliche phrase is, people don't resist change, they resist being changed. So it might be interesting to explore uh, if results are uh, kind of co-created. Suppose we decide that together as a team that this is the result we want, then perhaps the level of ownership of achieving those results is much higher, and the probability of achieving the results is much higher. But I am not very sure that's a very practical concept in the armed forces.
No, it is. In fact, it has more relevance to the armed forces because people change with great right. You can be a CEO for maybe 6, 7, 10 years, but you can't be a chief for more than 3 years. So change is inevitable. And else is inevitable is that in all likelihood, the moment you leave your chair, the next guy who comes will say that whatever he did was all rubbish. Let me change it. So, my predecessor was no good. So, what I found was that I was at a stage in the Navy when things were changing. Revolution in military affairs was taking place. We had grown up. I came to see a computer for the first time when I became a vice admiral, and I had to lock the doors of my office so that nobody should see me learning how to use a computer. And at that point of time, youngsters were, all over the place. So I realized that if I am not computer savvy or tech savvy, I should not come in the way of youngsters who are. And to say that the old way of doing things was very good, so let's keep all this, that was not correct. So we said, all right, we are going to transform the Navy. Admiral Muralidharan is here, he's probably seen all of this happening. So we said we are going to undergo a process of transformation, which meant that the older generation now must custom itself to things that are changing. Revolution in military affairs meant information technology, networking, smart weapons, those kind of things, which our generation did not grow up. So my fear was this only, that the moment I move on, things will go back. So what we tried to do was that take on board everybody, people, especially people who are going to be my successors or likely successors, bring them here, say, this is what I plan to do. You think it's all right, or would you like to have it differently? So as you said, carry them along with your change. You can try that. How far you succeed, one never knows. But that's certainly the logical way of doing things. The first instinct of your successor is to reverse things and change them back. But if he's already committed himself to change while you were still there, then he can't back out easily.
That's right. That's
So change is definitely resisted, and also it's easy to reverse change. Also.
right. But once the result is fixed, then it's non-negotiable. Then you have to
Yes,
achieve it.
that's true.
That's it. But there are times when they don't, when the team or the operating group doesn't achieve the mission. How do we address non-attainment of the results? How do we manage it? What happens?
No, well, if you fail to achieve your mission, then perhaps the target that you set was unrealistic. I mean, you must introspect also. I mean, nobody's perfect. So and every human being wants to succeed. Nobody wants to fail. I mean, that's human nature. So if you fail to achieve a target, then I think it's time to go back to the drawing board, collect all your people, and ask them, look, did we set ourselves an unrealistic target? And if so, what is unrealistic about it? Why are we not trained for it? Did we not understand the nuances? Did we not were we not prepared for it? And then perhaps re-look and reassign a fresh target and make sure that this time you do make it. You do achieve it. So there is. I mean, it's not so rigid. Even in the armed forces, often we do something rash or foolish and overambitious, and then you find yourself failing. So that's the time that maybe somebody senior to you should point out to you that look, chum, don't get carried away. Sit down, rethink, think it over. So there
I
is a
think
little bit of there should be a little bit of flexibility.
sure. I think there was a classic example of the Americans, American Air Force, U.S. Air Force trying to, and commandos trying to rescue the hostages held in the
Iran,
embassy in Tehran,
quite right,
and that whole fiasco where they lost, I think, 3 or 4 helicopters and 20 or 30 servicemen.
quite right.
Complete failure of the result, which made them go back to the drawing board and revisit their entire airborne operation, infrastructure, strategy, training, and so on and so forth.
Also, it
Intelligence.
involved different services. The U.S. Air Force, U.S. Navy was involved, Marine Corps were involved, and there was a little lack of coordination, and that's what led to a lot of rethinking and the enactment of a new act of Congress, about joint how the services. So that's a very good example of an overambitious
Yeah. So
campaign.
sometimes when you don't achieve the result, a detailed analysis, a root cause analysis can lead to huge improvements in future operational efficiency and results.
Absolutely. In 1971, we wanted to do everything, missiles, aircraft carriers, submarine, etc. So there was one instance where an amphibious operation was planned because there was intelligence that the Pakistan army would try to make an escape from there by sea. So our people decided to mount an amphibious operation, which is go to a beach, go with a specialized ship with a which with a ramp, and the soldiers get out and disembark. That's called amphibious operations.
LST or something?
LST, landing ship tank. It has doors which in the bows which open, and tanks and vehicles and soldiers can come out. So we did mount an amphibious operation in 1971. We chose the wrong place, or it was carried out in the wrong place because of some misunderstanding. We chose the wrong kind of soldiers. We chose Gurkhas, most of whom didn't know swimming. They were too short. The height of the
Oh,
water was too much. And to cut a long story short, the whole thing was a disaster. We lost a few lives. But it was a huge learning lesson for us that an amphibious operation is not something you take casually. You careful planning, careful selection. The tide of the sea, it varies. The height of water varies from time to time. So you have to be very punctual about your landing. The place has to be carefully selected. The soldiers have to be trained. So every disaster has its lessons.
yeah. And consequences, of course, of not achieving a result can be depending if, as you say in the book, if there was a professional mistake made, it's fine. You learn from it. But if the mistake or the non-attainment of a result was due to negligence or a lack of proper application of mind, then the consequences can be very, very powerful and negative.
Also, in the armed forces, in most instances, it's a question of lives. People are jumping out of aircraft with parachutes. People are landing amphibious. Pilots are flying. So you make a mistake in planning, you are likely to lose lives. So the cost is far too high
Right,
for to
right,
make mistakes.
right. And with that, I guess we can slip into our segment 3, which is about three-dimensional leadership insights. So what do we mean by three dimensions? We have these three dimensions of fighters flying, integrated command of naval and air assets, and then finally, as Navy Chief, total command of the force. So these are three different planes, I think. And what are the insights you've been able to kind of glean from this fabulous experience that you have in all these three planes?
Well, no one can claim to have experience of everything. Even say a naval aviator who knows something about flying, he gets the opportunity to sail a ship, etc. Uh, but even there, you have your own strengths and weaknesses. So no one can claim to be omniscient, that he knows all about everything. So I think you need to approach such positions with a degree of humility, because the Navy provides you a staff. The staff is full of experts. So you seek advice, or when advice is given to you or offered to you, you must accept it prima facie and then discuss things with you. So it is not that one man is the repository of all wisdom. He knows all about flying, all about submarines, all about gunnery, missiles. And it's not just, it doesn't stop there, because you're sitting on the Admiral's bridge and the engineer, staff engineering officer comes and tells you, sir, the steam pipe has burst under so much pressure, or this so and so pump is not working, or so and so radar, the magnetron is packed up. All this mess, something like gibberish. What does it mean? So you have to very often ask, tell me in plain language, what does it mean? So it means that if your steam pipe has burst, it has to be repaired or replaced or whatever it is, and then following machinery is not available. If it is not available, can we sail the ship or not, or does the ship sailing is delayed, or can the ship sail and it will only be able to do 15 knots and not 20 knots? Or so and so radar is not working, then what are the consequences? This gun will not operate, that missile will not fire. So there are wheels within wheels, complexities which no one person or admiral or general can claim to know about. So the Navy provides you with a comprehensive staff who are specialists, experienced people in each field. So your job is to take decisions. They will come to you with information. You take information, you seek their opinion, their advice. Then in your mind, you turn it around and then you come up with a decision, because the final decision is yours, to sail or not to sail, to fly or not to fly. The responsibility is also yours. The inputs will come from them. So that is how you need to manage. And it's not just this, because the situation I was placed in a situation in command of Andaman Nicobar Command. It was not just the three dimensions of the Navy. There was also an Army component, an Air Force component, Coast Guard component. So these four components each had its own internal dynamics, which are different from each other. Within the Navy, as you pointed out, there are three dimensions. Within the Air Force, there are two or three similarly. And when you come to headquarters in Delhi, there is an additional component, and that is the civilian component, the civilian bureaucracy, which works at its own pace, it has its own logic, own work ethic. And now you got to, merge all this mess and allow for the civilian way of functioning, their idiosyncrasies, their hang-ups, etc. So at that level of command, life is quite miserable. It's much more fun sitting on the bridge of a ship or the cockpit of an aircraft. Everything is under your control. You want full throttle, you give it, and you go at 400 knots. and everybody listens to you on a ship. You're the lord and master. You want 30 knots, the engine room will give it to you. In naval headquarters, if you want a notebook, buy a notebook or something, you have to take permission from some financial advisor. So these are the pains and pleasures of command at different levels. I've just given you an overall picture.
Sure, sure, sure. We see many CEOs actually have gotten so used to recognition and gotten so used to getting their way that a kind of insidious arrogance has built in. And they somehow believe in, maybe not very overtly, they don't show it overtly, but there is a lot of covert internalization that they are they have a monopoly on the truth. You'll be surprised, Admiral, to see how many CEOs uh, evolve like that. Power has kind of the power and success that they've enjoyed has very insidiously worked its way into their psyche, and they believe that they know everything. To me, that's a very, very dangerous thing for the organization.
Well, it's infinitely worse in the armed forces because the CEO has to introduce himself that I am CEO of so and so. In the armed forces, you're wearing it here, got 4 stars, and there are people saluting you and deferring you to you and carrying your briefcase and bowing and scraping all the while. So it takes a level head to make sure that it doesn't go to your head, against power, etc. Because um,
Yeah.
the other problem, which is a cultural problem, is that we give far too much deference to rank and age. In my experience, neither rank nor age gives you any wisdom, any special wisdom. You can be a 60-year-old fool with 3 or 4 stars on your shoulder, and nobody will dare to tell you. All it gives you is experience. You have 60 years, out of 60 years, you may have 40 years of experience in uniform, which doesn't always translate into wisdom. Experience and wisdom are not the same, especially if you haven't learned from your mistakes. And you can keep getting promoted in the armed forces. Many of us have been promoted without deserving it. And then when you reach a stage where you think that because I have got stars or brass on my shoulder, I am know all and know everything, and you stop listening to people and stop accepting advice, then things go wrong. Um, One would imagine that you know the lessons would be learned on the job, but it doesn't happen because in the 2 or 3 years you may not the consequences of your folly may not come back to roost on you. It may happen after you leave. Then the damage you've done stays behind you, and you will not know about it. So what you said about CEOs becoming arrogant is very much there in the armed forces. In fact, the danger is far more. So there is need for you to keep your feet firmly on the ground and have a you are always surrounded by staff officers, and your staff officers can either be sycophants who will tell you, sir, you're always right and you're always legal, or they can be honest men who will tell you what is a fact, and if you're going wrong they will whisper in your ear. Which reminds me that when the Roman generals, the Caesars they were called, used to come back from victorious campaigns, they were paraded on the streets of Rome in a chariot. They used to put a wreath of whatever on their heads and laurels
Laurel
on them,
wreaths.
absolutely. And crowds would be standing saying, Hail Caesar, Hail Caesar. And behind each general, there used to be a Nubian slave. Nubian is an African slave. He would be leaning forward and whispering something in his ear every now and then. Now, I have read somewhere that the Nubian slave's duty was to whisper to the general, Caesar, you're human, Caesar, you're human, Caesar, you're human. So that all this, hail and all that doesn't go to his head. So all of us need a Nubian slave behind us who should actually be a member of your staff, your PDC or your naval assistant or somebody who should keep telling you, what you said or you did wasn't quite right. Politely, of course, but set you right. That's the only way to keep your feet on the ground. Otherwise, you can get carried away. CEOs are vulnerable. There's a board of directors to kick them out, I think. I don't know how it works. But in the armed forces, not so easy to ease out of. person who's going
No,
wrong.
it's I've served on the board of a very large bank, and I've seen plenty of boards. You will be amazed at the number of CEOs who game the board, who populate the board with people who say yes to them all the time.
I've also been on a couple of boards, and I know that they do not like to hear unpleasant.
Absolutely. So
Uh,
what you said a few minutes ago about mentoring junior officers, and what you just said sparks a very provocative thought in my mind. Um, if the chief or 4-star, 3-star, and 2-star leaders make mistakes, the impact is much, much higher. It's amplified. It's almost like a nuclear fallout in terms of the impact it can have on not just the organization but the nation's security. So it's the stakes are very high that they get it right. So one of the reasons or the main reasons they don't get it right, and everybody makes mistakes. One of the main reasons for those kinds of mistakes is what you just said about, staying rooted, listening, having the bandwidth to listen and be humble. And very few people actually have that because the system develops them in a different way. So, how about a council of mentors for the senior most leaders? A council of mentors who who are not part of the hierarchy, who don't have any powers at all, no powers. Their only role is to point out how they can improve the leaders. They're not part of the hierarchy. It could be a set of retired chiefs like you with maybe some people from outside who have a different experience base, but who are there just to help and guide. Very impractical, but I think why probably
no, not
worth looking at.
impractical. 1 year after I retired, I got an
Yeah.
invitation from the U.S. Pacific Command in Hawaii. Um, Come and be a senior mentor to our coach. So I was quite mystified. I had never heard of this
Wow,
program. It was
that's
2007.
amazing.
So I went across to Hawaii. They flew me down. They put me up in their mess, etc. And that's exactly. And I met up with three other two vice admirals, one marine general, and myself, and one Japanese admiral. And five of us were the senior mentors for a course that they were conducting. So I said, "What is all this about?" And they said exactly what you're telling me now. They said we need people who are detached, disinterested, but experienced. And whenever we do something, we you sit at the back. So they conducted this course for 25 or 30 two-star admirals. And we were supposed to do was sit at the back, listen in, and every now and then inject something, either a question or an idea or a thought. So then when I spoke to them, they said this is standard procedure in the US Navy that we take retired admirals, we call them back. They all our exercises, live highly classified, secret, top secret. They sit there. I said, supposing they tell you something that the present commander, he's in the moment, he's current, he doesn't agree with it. He says that freedom is given to them, that they can say whatever they want, offer advice, but they should not feel upset if it is advice is not taken or
Right,
disregarded or go
right,
contrary. So
right.
this is a system which exists in the US Navy. So when I came back, I did this 2 or 3 times. When I came back, I very gently dropped a hint, but there was absolutely no response. And I don't think it will work in the Indian scenario. Because in the Indian scenario, we believe that once you leave, the wisdom is in the kursi. There's the chair of Vikramaditya, where the wisdom used to come. So
Yeah,
once you leave the chair, then you're totally devoid of all wisdom. And even if you write something or an article or letter, etc., it is disregarded. So I don't know how it is with you, since you are a senior mentor yourself. Perhaps it works in the civilian world, but I don't know whether I don't think it will work in the armed forces.
no, this is so true, Admiral, because this is really at the core of my own mentoring philosophy and practice. According to me and from my experience, a mentor can only be uh, successful or relevant if he or she is by definition without any vested interest. No vested interest other than the welfare of the leader he or she is mentoring and the organization. That's it.
Absolutely.
And that's the only way a mentor can be effective, and that's the only kind of person who can be a mentor, I think. And also, you can never knock on the door and say, here I am to mentor you. You can never do that. Only if there is a need and somebody reaches out,
Yeah, reaches out to you. Quite right.
then you can help. And that's the only way mentoring works.
Oh,
And so it's not a business, and it's not a volumes kind of thing. You'll have a few people, and your relationships are lifelong, based on trust.
so you are invited for to be to mentor somebody, or
Yeah,
and
I mean, I can't.
they value your mentorship.
Yes, I cannot come and say, here I am to mentor you.
True.
And that's a difference between a mentor and a consultant. That's a huge difference, but that's another story. You know, from all that we have been talking about, look at the whole panorama of the chief, and your own, you know, vantage position from the crow's nest, so to speak, at the very top of the hierarchy, right at the acme. What are some of those specific things relating to all this that I have on the screen? I mean, the scan pattern is something most people will not understand, but I think as an aviator, that's what makes you alive on the, that
Cockpit.
keeps you alive in the cockpit, isn't it? So, would you like to take off on it? All these things.
Okay. So the scan pattern of the chief is, I think the system has by now set it up for you so that you get um, encapsulated information. But there again, it depends from individual to individual. Some people like to get a very brief. Some people want to get detailed information. Some people don't want to hear bad news also. So again, the system is in place. You can ask for inputs. Of course, there is so much happening at sea, in the air, on the ground, domestic, the families, the men, the officers, etc. There's a lot of things happening in the human resources, operational capabilities, weapons, etc. So you have to be a little selective and decide what are the category A, where the red light should come on, amber light should come on, green light, etc. So you have to make your own. The system is available, information is available. You have to categorize and prioritize what kind of information you want at what time. Some people don't like to be disturbed at night. You have to tell your people that look, whether it's day or night, sleep or not, I want to be told. It's up to you. So the the scan pattern is a personalized thing, and you have to decide. Of course, when you're on a ship, for example, there is no question. You should, because if the ship comes to grief, it is you, no matter whether you were sleeping or in the toilet or whatever it is. So the captain is available within seconds or minutes of anything happening. Similarly, for the chief, of course the scale is much larger, and you have to prioritize. As I said, prioritize. Doctrine, strategy, etc., are now issues which are a huge weakness with us, culturally speaking, as Indians. There was a person called George Tanham, an American, who did a study of India's strategic culture. There's something called strategic culture, um, which indicates how you think, why you think, how you come to certain decisions, and not other kind of decisions. This came about because the Americans found that they could not predict why the Russians were doing what they were. This is during the Cold War. Why the Soviets were taking certain decisions. Because if the same situation was given to an American general or admiral, his decision would be X. But if the same situation was given to a Soviet general, he would take a different decision. So the American academics realized that there is something known as the strategic culture, which guides the way you assess situations and how you take decisions. George Tanham was sent by Rand Corporation to India in 1992 to write a small monograph. So he wrote a monograph, and he said that Indians do not at the moment have a very strong strategic culture. And he gave various reasons. cultural, historical, etc. That did not go down well. People were very upset. And they said we had Chanakya, we had the Vedas, we have the Puranas, we have this, Ramayana, Mahabharata. How come we don't have a strategic culture? Um, and it's a fact that we do have a strategic culture. It's just that we do not write down anything. So that 70 years after independence, we do not have a national security strategy. We do not have a national security doctrine. So tomorrow, we don't even know why the Chinese are doing what they are. They attacked us first time in 1962. We still don't know why did they attack us in 62. And for 70 years, we've had a border with them, which we call line of actual control, not an international border. For 70 years, we still don't know what is the point. So there is a deficiency in strategic culture. China every 2 years issues a defense white paper. Every 2 years. They're all on the internet, the unclassified version, in which they say these are our national aims and objectives, where China wants to be in 2030, 2040, 2050. How are we going to get there? The economic development plan, industrial development, armed forces, what kind of navy, air force, army will China have? It's all written down in the white paper. And how will we finance it? Where will the money come from? Despite appeals and pleas and requests, let's get a national security strategy going. It has not been forthcoming so far. Therefore, the armed forces have on their own decided to issue their own strategies. There's a maritime strategy. I think the Navy was the first to issue it. The maritime doctrine. There's an air warfare strategy, land warfare. But the root of all these strategies should be a national. The mother of all strategies should be a national security strategy. In the USA, there is Article 603 of the National Security Act, which mandates that the new president must issue a national security strategy within so many weeks or months of his taking office. And he has to issue. We have not issued. So when I stepped into this office in 2004, one of my first concerns was that where are we going? We don't know where we are going. We are building ships, we are buying submarines, etc., aircraft. But what are they for? What is their objective, etc.? We, no matter how much you ask the ministry or the government, they were not able to tell you this in specific terms. So we decided to write our own doctrine, our own strategy. We had two versions. One was classified, one was unclassified. We hoped that the unclassified version would be read by the bureaucrats, by the politicians, by the members of parliament, by the ministers, etc. I don't think anything of the sort has happened. But we did put in place a doctrine, a strategy, and a capabilities development plan. Now, all these are linked because if the nation wants to achieve certain objectives in the maritime domain, say we want to have control of the Indian Ocean, then from that aim, which is spelled out by the government of India, then the Navy will say, okay, I need so many ships, so many aircraft, so many submarines. Then from that will come, they will cost me so much every year till the year 2030. All this is sequential, ends, ways, means. But if you don't specify anything, leave it vague, then it's all up in the air. Then the financial
So that's
chaps
the
tell you,
doctrine.
the doctrine will tell you that. Yeah, the doctrine will emerge from national aims and objectives.
Correct.
So today, when you say I want 10 ships, the finance chap says, sorry, chum, there's no money. Then what do you tell him? He say, why do you want 10 ships? Who told you need 10 ships? So anyway, so from our side, we put down all these things in place, but they are yet to be backed up by a national document or a national strategy. Doctrine and strategy, of course, doctrine is a set of rules and procedures and processes which are more or less immutable. They should not change. They will change sooner or later, but for the time being, they do not change. They are a guideline for how you should operate, how you should utilize the forces available to you. And based on the doctrine, you evolve a strategy. Strategies will say that, okay, the Chinese PLA Navy is now making its appearance in the Indian Ocean. How are we going to tackle them? That will give you a strategy of how to tackle China in the year 2021 to 2022. Strategy will change as the doctrine may also change. So you need to have all these things in place, and then you can, then the force levels will come from there. But I'm afraid our system is not in place yet, and therefore when China, when the PLA army comes and intrudes into our LAC, the first thing that happens is that a defense minister goes to Moscow on a shopping trip to buy arms and ammunition to fight the Chinese. 3 days after they've intruded. So I'll leave it at that.
Yes, yes. And it's very interesting you mentioned that PLAN, PLA Navy. Um, the impact of clarity of doctrine and strategy is very evident. Today, the PLAN is a 360 ship navy, whereas the US Navy is around 294.
Right.
In terms of sheer numbers, they have overtaken the US. Okay, the story about effectiveness and combat power and all is different,
No, it's not different. Let's not fool ourselves. They're pretty good.
right? So that's even more scary. And it tells you what clarity of doctrine and strategy will give you in terms of brute
Absolutely.
capabilities in the field. Yeah.
Although I can see some questions popping up, I think in all fairness, we should.
Yeah, yes. But I must squeeze you a little bit about this whole business about morale and the balance between informality and discipline. And I think everything else kind of is sandwiched between those two important things. I read with great interest your chapter on a matter of honor in the book Crow's Nest about Admiral Jeffrey Bruda.
Buddha.
Bruda.
Buddha, yeah.
I mean, and I think that's something which will be so relatable and applicable to everybody in business and industry. This whole concept, morale, honor, discipline, informality, and so on.
Okay, so it started with this Admiral Jeremy Burda. He fought in Vietnam as a junior officer, and while you're serving in various sort of campaigns, you're entitled to a ribbon or a medal, and the ribbon you wear on your uniform. So Jeremy Burda put on a ribbon or a medal to which he was not entitled, either by mistake or deliberate. Now he rose through the ranks. Many years after the Vietnam War, he became chief of the US Navy, and he was the first man to rise from the rank of a sailor, that is below officer rank. He became an officer, and as an officer, he became the chief. He was very proud of his achievement. A journalist from Time or Newsweek magazine looked at his uniform, the ribbons that he wore with a magnifying glass, and he found that one ribbon he was not entitled to because he was not in the place or time where you earn that
The
ribbon.
combat duty in Vietnam.
Possibly, you're right. Combat duty. So I think he spoke to him on the phone and he said, "I want to interview you." So Jeremy Burda gave him a time or whatever for an interview. But I think an hour or two before that, he went home, pulled out his service revolver, and shot himself in the chest and committed suicide. That set off a huge controversy in the US Navy that suicide is a coward, this thing, that thing. On the other hand, other people said that having risen to where he felt that he had let down his service, he had let down himself by cheating, even though it was a very minor issue. Now, I one doesn't want, but if had this happened in India, one has to imagine what are the possibility, what are the avenues or excuses that one can make for such a minor transgression. But there was a man of honor who felt that he had betrayed his trust, and no price was too heavy to pay for it, and he took his own life. Now, these are all matters of personal, and here you see people who occupy the highest offices who are unaware of this term called conflict of interest, which means that if you have authority over something and you have a personal interest, then you should draw away from it, and they turn a blind eye to it. And when they are caught doing something wrong, they just try and cover it up. So that was the starting point. So I had written an article in way back in 1997, triggered off by Admiral Jeremy Burda's thing. And the thing is that I said that we were exemplars of morality and integrity and professionalism. But over the years, we all come from Indian society. We are all children. People who join today are schoolboys who are coming out of schools. They learn whatever they learn from their parents, from their schools. Now, how much of morality and integrity do we teach our children? How many parents jump a red light, or how many parents, when stopped by a policeman, will not pull out their wallet and say, "Acha, पहले तो he'll say कि तुम जानता नहीं हम कौन है." Then he will pull out his wallet and offer him 500 rupees. Now the child is watching you. I have often been jumped in a queue at the airport or something with a person with a child. So I turn around and tell him that you're jumping the queue, it's fine, I don't mind. But your child is watching you. When he grows up, he's going to do something similar. So these are all small points, but the fact is that in our culture, we do not learn integrity, morality, ethics. Perhaps our parents are too busy. Schools have no time. There is so much syllabus to be covered. So when they reach academies, military academies, that has been my appeal, that in military academies, we capture young men and women for 2, 3, 4 years. That's the time to indoctrinate them, to make sure that they come out as honorable and ethical officers and citizens of India. And the sad part is that when we find things are going wrong at the highest level, people who put in 20, 30, 40 years of service, when they put a foot wrong, then most of their misdemeanors are very similar to what we teach a cadet. A cadet is taught an honor code. I shall not cheat, steal, or lie, nor shall I mislead anyone. And I shall endeavor to encourage my fellow cadets to do the same. Now, if you become an admiral and you are caught doing something wrong, I can take a bet it will be either lying, cheating, stealing, or misleading someone. It will be one of those four things which you have been taught as a cadet not to do. So if that had been drummed or ingrained into you sufficiently, like Jeremy Burda, then by the time you reach the higher ranks, then perhaps A, you will not do it. If you do it, if you step wrong, that you will admit you have done something wrong, put in your resignation and go home. So those are some of the thoughts. They are very lofty and maybe impracticable thoughts,
But those are the thoughts that will build the morale and keep, the leader so charismatic and inspiring. Those are the things that the whole force looks up, the organization looks up to. So it's critically important to retain the morale and the discipline and the ownership in the organization.
True.
Yes. As you said, maybe we can take a look at some of the questions.
You're the boss, mother.
I see there's a very interesting observation question from Mr. Vepa Kamesham, who, by the way, we are so honored and privileged to have with us today. He is a former Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India. Mr. Kamesham is an iconic figure in India's banking and finance, the way we have evolved in that area. So he says, is there too much of ad hocism in the absence of clear doctrine? And the Council of Mentors is a good concept, but will the incumbent chief accept such advice?
Thank you, sir. You are absolutely right. There is not too much, but there is a degree of ad hocism. And that ad hocism is the blame lies with the government of India for not having given adequate direction to the armed forces. That German strategist von Clausewitz has famously said that war has no existence of its own. War is only an act, political act. It's continuation of politics by other means. So if war is a continuation of politics, then it is the politician who should tell us how to fight a war. Not how, but why are we fighting a war? For what purpose? When should the war end? At what stage? If that is so, then the direction of war is also the responsibility of the politician. Unfortunately, for 70 years, the Indian politician has distanced himself from the military, except when it suits him. He has refrained from giving direction, refrained from finding out what are the the problems, the hurdles, etc., and refrain from or avoided providing adequate finance. So decision making does become ad hoc because if there is no inadequate direction from the government, then that happens. We just discussed this business of mentorship. Yes, I think the chief would resign, but if it is corporate decision or mandated that you got to have mentors, then let them be there. And of course, mentor will not have overriding authority or say. He will only offer advice. If it doesn't suit the chief, he's free to reject it. I mean, that caveat must be there because the responsibility is that of the chief, not of the mentor. So I think a mentor system may not be bad. You have plenty of retired people floating around doing very little. You can have a think tank and involve them.
Very interesting question from Mr. Tulsi Tawri, who himself an author and a great thinker. Um, he's very interesting question, very tough question too. Uh, Personally, did you ever face a situation that required an ethical conflict? And how does one deal with an ethical conflict without losing team principles?
Using
Team principles.
team
Team, without
team principle. Yeah,
compromising
okay.
the integrity of the team.
Yes. Well, to be frank, I did when I was chief. Uh, there was a magazine which cast aspersions on me, which were not true. So I tried to reason with the editor, the press council, etc. Then they mounted a campaign. So I saw no other option. I wrote out my resignation overnight and gave it to the defense minister. Defense minister said there is no need for this, Admiral. I said, yes, there is a need. I owe it to my men because they read the newspaper every morning on every ship and submarine. So I cannot carry on. So he said, all right, leave it with me. I'll think. So I think they did their inquiries, investigative agencies, whatever it was, did their inquiries, and about 10 or 12 days later, he called me and he returned my letter. So these dilemmas will come before you. You are pretty well off by the time you reach higher ranks. You get a good pension. Any day is good enough to leave, provided you think that the cause is worth doing it. So the options are always available to you. If you don't agree with your boss or you feel that your reputation or your integrity has been cast, aspersions have been cast, you should leave.
Yes, that's amazing.
Straightforward.
Uh, Amazing, amazing. This is the kind of leadership we need in our country. You have to be able to carry your resignation in your pocket when integrity is questioned.
You should.
And yet, our polity is completely infested with conflict of interest.
Conflict of interest is a term which I don't think is understood. You should you should explain it more in your lectures and
Yeah,
mentoring.
yeah,
Conflict of interest is not understood in public life in India.
right. Um, I guess that's about it in terms of our Q&A, and will run a short poll now, and I'll request my colleague Rohit to run the poll. Okay, I'll just show the questions here. Uh, all participants, may I call your attention to these poll questions? Just have to click yes or no to these 5 questions. Question 1 is leadership is more tactical than strategic at the bottom of the hierarchy. Question number 2 is once a result or target is fixed, it becomes non-negotiable. Question number 3, it is necessary to build a balance between informality and discipline in an organization. Number 4, leaders have to protect morale to ensure that the organization remains prepared and potent. And this was the key takeaway from Admiral's personal experience about submitting his resignation when a question was raised. He did it because of his loyalty to the service and also his deepest desire to protect the morale of the institution. And number 5, capability building is optional. Yes or no? I think we are doing okay on time, Admiral. We are just 6 minutes ahead or behind, rather. A whole lot of very interesting questions.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we don't have time to, really address every question. I wish there was. So everything that you shared has struck such a chord with all our partners in learning, and it's
I'm
got them
glad people
thinking.
haven't wasted their time or
No,
afternoon.
not at all. So many people are logged in, and everybody stayed, and everything that you shared has gone straight into the consciousness of all our participants. We'll have the results in a minute or so.
So
People are
what happens
still.
with this poll result?
We can see it on screen. I mean the answers, you know, and then maybe a couple of minutes we can spend talking around it and see what they say.
Pollsters have earned a bad name after these recent elections.
That's right. Yeah. It's a kind of a dipstick,
Okay.
just kind of
Audience reaction.
kind of what people are thinking. Very interesting question also from Ranjit. He says, is there any institution in India which combines the lessons learned in the armed forces, which can be applied to the corporate sector and vice versa?
Not to my knowledge. Of
Yes.
course, I think Picky's had a director general who was a retired army officer, lieutenant general. So he may have done some cross pollination while he was in office. General Mehta was there, but there is no institution as such.
Admiral, everybody is so thrilled to hear you. Look at all the wonderful comments and everything in
Thank
the
you.
Q&A. But there's one interesting one. It says, Admiral, even after so many years and in spite of being retired, how do you look so fit?
Well, if you started getting kicked around at the age of 16, 17, then old habits die hard.
Yeah.
No.
Um, Rohit, can you close the poll? Let's take a look at the results if you're ready. Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Can you see my screen, Admiral?
I can see it.
So the answer to the first question, leadership is more tactical than strategic at the bottom of the hierarchy. 79% people say yes, and 21% say no. So that's interesting. Uh, Obviously, some people also feel that there has to be a little more strategy, a little more element of strategy at the bottom level. Question number two, once a result or target is fixed, it becomes non-negotiable. Interestingly, 74% say yes and 26% say no. Any comments, Admiral?
Well, if it was a military audience, I would have understood, but I'm a little surprised that I don't know what the background of people is, but uh, in a way, it's a good thing that once you take a decision, you stick to it and don't compromise. Otherwise, sab chalta hai is our normal ethic. So once you take a decision, it's non-negotiable. It's a good thing. I wish it was practiced in public life.
But 26% feel that they don't agree with it. They say maybe it should be negotiable.
No, it depends on your background. I mean, in the military, I would
Yeah,
say most people should say it's non-negotiable.
right.
Your target is given to you, you jolly well will attain it. And it is possible in the military to do it because you are provided the means to do it. In the civilian world, corporate world, it's business. I don't know. Like I
It's
said,
difficult.
yeah, you might set over ambitious targets. So there is a need for a degree of flexibility. So I would
So
have thought 50-50 would have been
yeah,
more.
but this is where involving people in fixing the targets
Yes, so
becomes.
the process of fixing the target needs to be looked at.
That's right.
That
Absolutely.
when you fix the target or result, then did you consult enough people? Is it achievable or not? That is the starting point.
That's right.
For you unrealistic targets, you cannot be
That's right.
achieved.
That's right. Question number three, it is necessary to build a balance between informality and discipline in the organization. 97% say yes. So,
Yes, I suppose, but it is very difficult to do in Indian conditions. Extremely difficult. I mean, other countries, they do draw a line between working hours and after working hours. But till Friday, it's all business. Friday afternoon, from Friday afternoon, Sunday night, or early Sunday morning, it's the weekend.
yeah,
Whereas here we do not we very often don't work hard enough when it's time to work, and we don't pay hard enough when it's time to pay. But in the armed forces, we do try and inculcate this that during work, it is work, and you will maintain a formal relationship. After work, whether it's social, and sports plays a great role in this. You would realize that on the sports field, you don't address anybody. There's no sir or whatever it is. You call everybody by name. Hey, give me a pass, or kick the ball, or whatever it is. So we make a distinct effort to um, balance between formality at work and informality socially and at play. And I am
great.
glad this percentage is good, 97. But how
Yes,
often is
that's
it
right.
practiced in India? I don't know. Because the danger here is that if I get too familiar with this chap, he will take advantage of. Oh,
Right.
so that fear is
Probably,
always there.
maybe this is an aspiration that everybody has.
I hope, well,
Which- And question number five, capability building is optional. 84% say no, and 16% say yes. So most people say capability building is mandatory. But interestingly, a small number percentage of people also feels it's not that critical.
yeah, well, you probably you don't have the time to ask them why they are saying it. But
Yeah,
otherwise,
yeah,
capability building, I mean, otherwise, what are you doing?
that's right.
Why are you in a particular job? Build capability for the future.
Yeah. So we'll close the poll and uh, Q&A we dealt with, and we did the poll, and here we are. Over to you, Admiral.
Yeah, I've spoken enough, Madhav. Well, all I want to say is that, as I said at the beginning, that I think this topic was very astutely chosen by Madhav, because there has been a historic um, lack of strategic leadership in our country. Historic. You can go back to 1526, First Battle of Panipat. Then you come to 1498 when Vasco da Gama landed in Calicut, in your hometown, Madhav. There was no strategy. There was no maritime. I mean, we didn't even think of the maritime. Although India has been a great maritime power during the time of the Cholas and so on. When it came to the 15th century, the Portuguese, the French, the British came to India, there was not a sign of any navy or maritime thinking. Leadership was in a vacuum. Then we come to Battle of Plassey, a small force of some 2 or 3 thousand British, not British troops, they were Indian troops led by British officers, defeated 18,000 force of Nawab of Plassey. Then 100 years later, we have the Great Indian Mutiny, or the First War of Independence, where sepoys from all over the country converge on New Delhi, on Delhi. What are they looking for? They're looking for a leader. The whole of India could not throw up a leader. The local emperor is 81 years old, he's too old, his two sons are incapable of, they're only writing poetry. So that Plassey, 1857, and then that led to 200 years of foreign rule. Anybody who felt like coming here could rule the country with the help of our own people. So leadership has been a great flaw. Lack of leadership has been a great flaw. Post independence, we've had leaders of all kinds. Again, strategy. I mean, I've given you the example that our first confrontation with the Chinese was in 1962. Decades have passed. We have not analyzed the reason why China is doing what it is going to do in the future, how are we going to tackle it. When they finally decide to push your line of actual control, we go scurrying around and indulging in knee-jerk reaction because there is no China strategy, there is no national strategy. So we need to inculcate leadership, we need to nurture leadership. Armed forces does it in a very methodical manner. And we moment young man or woman joins the armed forces, we start building him up into a leader, ethically, morally, professionally, etc. So similarly, we need to find some way of politics. Perhaps is the only school of leadership that we have at the moment. I will not comment on it, but the last 70 years has politics has thrown up leadership, but of various types. Much of it is indifferent. And the results we are facing now. So I think both the topics chosen this afternoon were very valid and pertinent, and these are issues that we need to reflect upon. And I've just provoked a little bit of discussion. But much wisdom doesn't lie here. But it's for you to introspect, to reflect, and speak and discuss and write. So with that, thank you for inviting me, Madhav. It's been a pleasure being here.
Thank you, Admiral. Everything that you said has been not only a revelation, but a kind of mantra for our country, really. And I wish all of us can internalize every little thing that you said because they are dripping with authentic, experiential life lessons. And this is the way you have lived, and this is what you taught us. And it's a lesson that we all need to learn. Uh, Essentially, what you shared today was that leadership is the ultimate competitive edge. You can have all kinds of platforms, weapons platforms, all kinds of systems and processes. You can have billions of dollars spent in creating those assets, but if leadership is absent, none of it is worth even a dime. And this is why capability building, training, and most important of all, trust, integrity, honor are the foundations on which great institutions are built, and they are a sine qua non for survival. And I think that personal example that you gave uh, about ethical conduct and staying away from conflicts of interest are worth their weight in gold. Anybody aspiring to any leadership position, wanting to be authentic, wanting to be respected, trusted, and effective in piloting their own organizations, has to understand that there is no easy way. As Admiral says in his book, choosing the hard right way or choosing the easy wrong way. That's what it's all about. The ethical way is always the hard way. And having the courage to do that is probably even more important than raw physical courage. And in fact, if you had that moral courage of separating what is true from what is not right, if you had that courage, I think it follows logically that you will have physical courage. And physical courage is trainable. Moral courage is something you inculcate from childhood. And that's a big lesson you taught us today, Admiral. And I hope every one of our partners in learning will internalize that. And all of us stand so enriched with this time that we have spent with you. I must thank you so much for being so patient and for answering the questions and sharing your knowledge without any let or hindrance and in such a wonderfully informal manner. It's been a true honor to interact with you, and I wish there were more leaders like you in our country. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Madhav. Thank you. Pleasure being with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Uh, I think we'll call it a day. Thank you so much.